Cheers.
Now, I should be able to add some footnotes here as well, just for later on. I'm not really sure how that works, uh, but we are recording and we should have this ready once we finish in an hour or so. So I will go and share this. It is also connected to my Google Drive, so you will have the link and you can easily listen to it. I listened to our second podcast and it was surprisingly entertaining.
To our second one, really. Well, we got off to several tangents, but it was kind of I enjoyed it. I think that's the most important thing. If we enjoy the conversation, we have something to get out of it, then other people that are listening to it are like, oh, this might be interesting.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
our standards are very low. Again, I think if it, we just need to find it interesting.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, one other thing before we go ahead with anything is to use your normal voice, just so that later on I can listen to it and I can figure out if there's still anything wrong or not.
isn't this my normal voice? Am I? What are you?
I think it is, but I mean the volume wise.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I probably shouldn't speak too loud, right? That's the idea.
Well, you should see like a wavelength going on in the bottom, and you can
Yep,
see
I see it.
the tops and the bottoms. So when it really oscillates, that means that you are probably talking too loud. But generally, you can see that my wavelengths are okay. It should more or less remain around that same, I guess, distance, whatever it's called. I don't know how to describe it. I'm not an audio engineer.
Amplitude, frequency,
Amplitude, frequency,
hertz,
love it. Anyway, what do you
rent a
want to talk
car.
about today?
Um, I'm super tired from last night. I'm still reading volume 7 of Harry Potter. I stayed
Okay.
up until 1:30. I've got 200
Tasty.
pages left of the seventh volume. It's super engrossing. So if I were to do an icebreaker, I just ask kind of like, what do you call it if or when a an orphan takes a selfie?
I'm not sure. How do you call it?
Family photo.
True. Good one. Very good
Sorry, it's
one.
just a cheap trick I saw earlier on TikTok.
Orphan jokes. Love it. So the
So
whole
that's what's
wizarding
on my
word,
mind.
that's what's
All,
on your mind, orphans?
all I'm doing is just reading this last volume, and yeah, it's really great. I really don't want it
Yeah,
to be over. It's so fun. I don't think, as an adult, I've had a more entertaining read than reading 7 volumes of this crazy book this year during the lockdowns. Yeah.
that's good. I haven't got ahead with my reading, so it's good to see at least someone reads.
What was the that was the last book you really enjoyed? Like you that you couldn't did you have this set? Because I feel like I'm a teenager again. When I was 16, I think I got into reading again the classic novels like Count of Monte Cristo or Les Miserables, or those
Sure.
really great novels, great narratives. David Copperfield, and yeah, for me, I mean, at least they're great narratives. Where you have a hero, it's quite a classical structure,
Sure.
and I always love those sort of books, and I haven't had that feelings since I'm reading this. Since,
Good.
and now I started doing this, and it's brought that
And
back again. So it's fine.
and once you finish the Deathly Hollows, I don't know how to pronounce it. You can
Hollows, yeah,
read Hollows. You can start with the Cursed Child, which is universally hated. So you can
by
tell
J.K.
me
Rowling as well.
no by the community. I don't think it
No,
actually.
I mean, who wrote that, The Cursed Child? I haven't heard of this
I
book before.
don't know. It was written by someone that knows J.K. Rowling and got the permission to write it. They even made a play out of it,
Hmm.
and it's not good. So who knows? I don't know.
Well, my wife is reading something from J.K. Rowling, but I don't remember the name of it. It's something about Stranger.
Uh huh.
It's one of her later crime mysteries novels, and
Sure.
the thing with J.K. Rowling is that, and I've had this with some of the books, maybe volume 5, you read for 100 pages and I kind of sometimes it's a bit boring. I shouldn't say this, but I've sometimes found it less engaging between page 100 and page 300. and
Hmm.
then everything breaks loose at the end. Like she's really amazing at writing, at closing narratives,
Yeah,
closing plot lines, and then bringing them together in the last 100 pages. It just blows your mind, and that's what she's experiencing right now. It's like, oh, okay, it was really worth putting through when it's not one of her best books, right? Um, just to have this experience at the end, and she can't put it down again. We were reading by until midnight last night, and then I stayed for another hour and a half on mine. It was
that's
pretty
brilliant.
fun. It's just
Yeah,
what people do when they're married and when they have no other responsibilities, and it's Saturday night, and there's too much content on all the platforms. You just kind of regroup around the bed.
you are
The
really
bed.
selling the idea of marriage here.
I mean, why not? I mean, there are worse things. There are worse things
Yeah,
in life.
I mean, I guess the last book that I found really tedious but also satisfying was the Song of Ice and Fire books, the one they made the Game of Thrones show from,
Hmm.
and that was, I think the last book was 1100 pages, and it had some plot lines that were really dragging on, but then after I finished it, I was like, it was kind of good. So
And
who
what was
knows?
keeping you going through? Like you're page at page 400. What and how long did it take you to read the book?
I don't know. It depends. I kind of had periods, so there were some weeks when I was reading nonstop, and there were some weeks when I just didn't pick it up because I just didn't have the patience or I was busy. I guess House of Leaves as well. That's probably the last book that I read that I really enjoyed, and I still consider it my favorite book. That's really long and really like
What
complicated.
was it called again? Sorry.
House of Leaves. I
House of
showed it
Leaves.
to you the other day.
Mm,
Well, the other day than I saw you before the lockdown. It's a postmodern book about a house that's bigger inside than
mm,
outside.
mm.
And yeah, I don't want to sell it because like I think it's a great book, but it's very difficult to explain. And
Sounds like it's
yeah,
exactly the opposite of the classic archetypal type of books, the one that I was mentioning, Harry Potter, Count of
yeah,
Monte Cristo, like the romantics, right, of the 19th century.
yeah,
The Bible is also one of those narratives about a hero, right? That
yeah.
and I haven't read that many postmodern books. I'm intrinsically quite skeptical of postmodernism, but I don't
I
know
can
anything about
recommend you a few. Actually, there are two books that I could talk about today. One is House of Leaves, which is a very complicated book, and I think it's one of my favorite book of all time. But it is complicated to explain. The other one is Cat's Cradle, which I thought I can talk to you about, which is a much shorter book. Also
Is
has
it
a
also
postmodern
postmodernist
structure.
or? Mhm.
It it is
And
called
I'm happy to
postmodern.
ask questions. I'm happy to ask questions rather than present this time because I'm right in the middle of my book, so I don't want to give away too many plot lines.
Cool.
Sorry, yeah. So go ahead.
Um, it is considered to be postmodern. I don't think it's postmodern the same way as the other book I mentioned, or that some of the books that is considered to be postmodern. I think the idea of postmodernism is a pretty big umbrella that can mean a lot of different things. It is a book by Kurt Vonnegut. Have you ever heard of Kurt Vonnegut? I think you heard of him.
I think
Yeah.
I've was that Catch 22 that I've read from him or
No,
no
Catch 20, Slaughterhouse number
Slaughterhouse
five.
5. Sorry, yeah.
Correct. Slaughter number five is Kurt Vonnegut. So his story is that he was in real life part of the American army in the Second World War in Europe.
Yeah, he was stationed in Dresden, right?
Stationed, he was captured and he was kept as a political prisoner.
Right.
And in the end of his sentence or his end of his imprisonment, he saw the Allied forces carpet bombing Dresden.
Hmm.
So this was his defining moment of his ideas and I guess philosophy. He was always adamantly against war. He really hated nuclear weapons and carpet bombing. He was a massive, I guess, how do you call it, like an anti-activist
A
of carpet
pacifist,
bombing?
or well, at least definitely against
Pacifist, yeah.
mass annihilation weapons and that destroy civilians and
Weapons of mass
army.
destruction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was famously quoted saying like, or describing how he saw like a giraffe running out of the zoo while on flames just
Hmm.
during the carpet bombing.
Was that
And
part of the Slaughterhouse Five, or was it a subsequent
yeah,
interview he did?
so he
I
talked
don't
about it
remember.
in interviews, but it was also described in Slaughterhouse Number
I
Five.
just don't remember that book, but I remember leaving it a big impression on me when I read it.
Yeah. So the book I wanted to talk about is actually Cat's Cradle, and it's not Slaughterhouse Number Five.
That's okay. No, it's
But
good. It's good introduction on him because I read when I read Slaughterhouse Five. It was probably in my early 20s, and I
yeah.
it was one of the few books I read in my 20s when I took a big gap. So really keen to hear more about Kurt Vonnegut's other
I
book.
really like Kurt Vonnegut, and he did his later work became more personal and way more postmodern. A lot of the stuff around Breakfast of Champions and Time Quake's been really good books as well.
Mm.
Very easy to
Well,
read.
would you mind explaining what postmodernism is? It means so many
No,
things to a lot of people, or
correct. You defined it. It means a lot of things to a lot of people.
if
I
anything, it means that the meaning is embedded in the context, and it's kind of up to everyone's interpretation of things. It's a kind of it leads very quickly to moral relativism, or and also to nihilism. Has some avenues towards like everything, depending on the context, everything can be interpreted in a different way. Therefore, there is no right and wrong. It also
I
means that
wouldn't
there's
go
no
that far.
meaning. But
Yeah.
at the base, at its first principles, it's actually it is an innovation of understanding how complex the world is, right? And how many lenses you can apply
I mean, look, I wouldn't go that
to
far.
things.
I think postmodern is a bit like avant-garde. Avant-garde was the movement early 20th century. It included people like Picasso. It included people like, can't think of any other avant-garde artist. Klimt. It included people that like Dali. These people have very different type of work. They're all under the same umbrella, but essentially, if these guys would meet in a bar, they wouldn't be able to share anything because they are just so different. So I guess you could talk about postmodern books, postmodern poetry, postmodern whatever, and some of these stuff you said are probably true. I don't know personally. I'm not that much into it. The point of, just to go into Cat's Cradle, the
Mhm.
idea of Cat's Cradle. Do you know what Cat's Cradle is?
No idea. It sounds like a song. Cats in the
Uh,
Cradle.
Yeah, so Cat's Cradle is a game. Cat's Cradle is a string game. It's apparently a really old game. Apparently, thousands of years ago, people played it. The idea is that you grab a string and you put it between your fingers, and then another player needs to take some of the strings off of your hand by forming new shapes of it. And what the shapes are, that's defined before. So there's the cat's cradle, which is the beginning shape, and then there's what's called a diamond, a manger. I don't know if it has anything to do with the French eating, but the idea is that it changes shapes. The idea of the game is that the person that manages to keep the shapes going wins, and the person that fails to keep the shapes going and create like a nonsense shape would fail. How this has something to do with the book, I'm not sure, but that's where the book's title comes from. The book itself, the central theme of the book is a thing called Ice 9. And Ice 9 is a metaphor for nuclear weapons. Ice 9 is a type of water structure, a molecular structure that was invented. And the idea of Ice 9 is if an Ice 9 structured water touches a non Ice 9 structured water, it turns it into an Ice 9 structured water. Does that make sense?
So it's almost viral.
It's viral. It is a viral water that turns every other water that it touches into the same.
So what is the
Now,
purpose of Ice Nine? It sounds like Einstein.
it
Is
sounds
this
like
a real thing or is it just made up?
it's made up. Now, the purpose of Ice 9 is the melting point of Ice 9 is plus 100 degrees. So under 100 degrees Celsius, Ice9 is in ice form. Now imagine a world where all the water is Ice9. That word is frozen because
Hmm.
that word needs to have at least 100 degrees Celsius to melt that ice into water. Under 100 degrees, it's all frozen.
Yep.
So the idea of Ice9, and this comes back to the metaphor, it's about Cold War ice, and it's about a Cuban missile crisis where the missiles themselves considered to be, I think, nuclear or somewhat devastating.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
story itself is about this island, which is a very poor island. It is a metaphor for Cuba. And this poor island doesn't have much technology, but it has a dictator that wants to be very, very important. But the
Sounds like
dictator
the problem with North Korea as well.
could be. The dictator himself is dying of cancer, and he wants to have a heir. And he picks a scientist as a heir from the United States, a scientist who happens to be the son of a person who invented Ice9. It is quite explicitly said that he picked the heir because he hopes that the heir has access to Ice9, which would make the island powerful. Because if you have a weapon like Ice9, then you can dictate your own terms. The
Hmm.
story itself is about this guy who is kind of doing a research, and he goes to the island to learn more about the scientist. And the scientist is dead at this point, so he kind of wants to learn more about the scientist's family who is on this island. And he gets into this political situation where he is actually offered to rule this island while there is a developing situation around Ice9. Now,
There's
one
a
more
vacuum of power where that kind of sucks him up at the top.
there is a vacuum of power going on, and he himself doesn't want to get into it.
Yeah.
He's just an observer, but he is smart enough to be the most reasonable guy in the room. And one of the things that happen with the island that's very interesting is the Bokono religion. Kurt Vonnegut himself uses this book to contrast religion with technology. He talks about how, technology is great, and when technology is developed, it can be used for a lot of good things. But he also talks about how technology can be an incredibly terrible, devastating impact, such as nuclear weapons. But in this case, it's Iceland. The religion itself is very interesting, in my opinion, and that's really what I want to focus on. The
Hmm.
religion is called Bokono, made by a guy whose name I think is Bokono, no idea. He has several songs, one of
Boko
them
Haram.
called Nothing to Do with Boko Haram. He himself is a very cynical man. He kind of comes across as a parody of a prophet,
Wait, so he's the priest. He's the high priest of this religion, or something like that.
sort of. So the story you need to understand is that he made this religion, this cult, this sect on the island that talks about cynicism, teaches cynicism, but also teaches acceptance of your fate. And he was banned. His religion got banned. And the ruler of the island executes some people every single year who they find be part of this religion. And what our main character learns is that everyone in the island, including the ruler himself, is part of this cult. So this creates a weird
So wait,
narrative.
he's part of it, but then he sacrifices people as
Correct.
well for it. Okay.
Not for it, because of it.
But I don't understand why.
Correct. The idea here is that the religion itself becomes powerful when it's quote unquote secret, mystical, or banned because it creates a go to point for people that they can use to, I guess, lead their life. Because if you think about it, the government itself, the island's government is all about power, it's all about politics, it's all about weapons. The poor population doesn't have the technology, they are suffering, they have nowhere to go. So their counterpoint is the religion. And to make that religion a real counterpoint, the government bans the religion. But in reality, the religion is very much alive and everyone is part of it. The Bokono religion is very cynical and very much a satire of religions. They are a collectivist religion that teaches that everything should be shared and everything is should be appreciated in the community. Their rituals about two people putting their feet together. I don't know if it would fly during the COVID pandemic, but nevertheless, it really works for them, and it's essentially just a cynical counterpoint to technology and science and I guess progression and politics.
Is
Because
it
unlike
self-labeled? Is it self-labeled as cynical, or does it come across as cynical from the way
it
people
comes across
behave?
as cynical, it comes across as cynical. It doesn't it is more nuanced than that. So when you read the book, there's a lot of other
Mm.
aspects to it. The point is that this is the kerfuffle that our narrator finds himself in, where he has to balance power between religion and politics, between technology, weapons of mass destruction, and human understanding and connections. And ultimately, the book is a postmodern book, and the ending is not positive. I don't know. Am I supposed to spoil these books? I don't know.
You don't have to spoil it. No, but I'd like to discuss maybe instead of saying what happens,
Yeah,
rather talk about what it means, the so what, because I have some questions. Can I ask you some questions
sure.
about what he
Go
said?
for it.
'Cause I'm
I
genuinely
have the
curious.
Wikipedia page open so I can check it.
Yeah, it's okay. No, but I think you first of all you draw on the idea of technology and humanity, right? And the fact that we're
Mhm.
developing this technological power that is almost beyond us, that could lead to our annihilation, and that was very obvious in the 60s that just pressing a button could have destroyed, millions, hundreds of millions of
Correct.
people. And at the same time, we live in this materialistic world that has, Nietzsche, God is dead, right? So religion itself is no longer there. It doesn't really provide an answer to people, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't really provide a solution. It's almost as you're describing it, disconnected from reality and the seriousness of reality, right? Because touching your feet together has absolutely no utility when you're faced with poverty, when you're faced with mass annihilation. I get
Correct.
that. I just wanted to make a point around the first one, which is as humans and developing technology. I was thinking about this with my daughter this morning as she's learning what's good and bad. I introduce technology to her. So as she becomes more and more aware of herself and her movements, I introduce technology, right? So the first thing that I do is, um, for instance, I cut some watermelon, right? And then she's really interested in using the knife. The knife is a technology. I didn't
Sure.
invent it, but we have access to this technology. And then at the beginning, I can't trust her with a knife, right? She, as a child, she has these reflexes. She would probably
Probably.
stab herself. But as she gets more and more awake, so to speak, at the age of 2, she gets actually really dexterous. So she's slowly able to leverage that technology to almost cut her own watermelon. But the point that I'm making, and the same with for instance, I don't trust her with sockets, or I don't trust her with a gas heater. So that's kind of an area where she's not allowed. And the reason for that is that she's not yet competent to understand the consequences of that technology, I was thinking.
Yeah.
So she's, if she does something to the gas heater, presses the buttons too much, or rips the cord out, we get all smoked with methane or explode. Or same
Sure.
with putting a fork in a socket. She doesn't yet understand electricity, but she understands cutting mechanics, right? So in a way, I follow her development, and what the parallel that struck me was, you seeing where this is going. I think as humans, we become more and more technologically powerful, but then our consciousness, our ability to be aware of its consequences and how we use it needs to mature as well in line with that. And you see it as a
Okay.
child as you go through these stages that you become more and more competent, and maybe this extrapolates societally as well, right? So
Yeah.
clearly in the 60s we had a situation where we had progressed so much scientifically in the world of atoms and subatomic particles. We just didn't know how to handle it anymore, and one button would have meant pure destruction, and there was a genuine psychosis about that. And the second part that I wanted to, what that triggered me about was the religious aspect of it. So technically, the way I see religion a little bit is really pragmatic. actually. A lot of the things that we develop are kind of bottom up. Um, when it comes to religion. And then bottom up practices around, let's say, I do this example right now about fasting, for instance. Fasting is a huge trend right now, but it's been done by millennia, right? And
Hmm.
people realize that it's not good to eat meat every time, and it's good to alternate. Even dogs would eat grass sometimes, right? Just to cleanse. The point that I'm making is that we've developed some bottom-up intuition about nutrition. For instance, we know that we shouldn't eat fast food all the time, even though it's really tasty, and we should eat veggies and be vegan one day and maybe have some meat another day. I'm not saying just, but we know that it's good to be omnivores. And what this happened was that it got slowly built up through the evolution of society into something like religion and keeping Lent and you know gods dying on a Wednesday and sorry maybe being punished on a Wednesday, dying on a Friday. So those days you'd be kind of respecting that sacrifice, which is an abstraction almost of your own life's intuition. That's how I is my intuition about religion. But there's moments when you lose you lose the intuition with what's around you with real world and the things that are supposed to enable your survival, right? Like these practices that are life enriching, life giving, extend your life, eating well, being healthy without medication. In the case of weapons and subatomic particles, they lose the contact with your own survival instincts, and that's
Yeah,
where religion breaks down as well. Is at the most practical level, you don't know how to operate this button anymore. Anyway, so that's what I was thinking when you pointed that out.
yeah. You know what's good about this is that Kurt Vonnegut himself doesn't try too much of the interpretation. He doesn't really help the reader to make sense
No.
of the words. But as most postmodern works go, it's open for interpretation. So I think in that sense, I I think it's an excellent book. But I like your metaphor that basically humans in the 60s with nuclear bombs and Ice9 in this case are just like your daughter with a knife. And that kind of like gives us that sense on what's happening right now, at least in the book.
Hmm.
And to add what you are saying, yeah, the maturity that humans have is important, no matter what technology is available. And I think one part that Kurt Vonnegut himself alludes to in the book is that the guy that created Ice9, the dude that made the weapons of mass destruction, was just the science guy. He was just scienced. He didn't really have that human aspect of it. And
Yeah.
his you can see that in the memories of his family, how he didn't really care much about his family, like he was just kind of like there, and he didn't really think about what the consequence of his invention will be. Not to say he did anything wrong, science is science, but there's obviously that controlling framework that humans need to make sure that they safely use these technologies and they don't pop the fork into the socket. And another thing
I
that
would.
comes
Can
up.
I add something to this is
Yeah,
something I
sure.
got from Nassim Taleb reading about science. Science is very good at telling you what not to do. It's very good at saying, don't put the socket in, don't put the fork in the socket. It doesn't tell you what to do with the fork,
Or
you
the
know.
socket in the fork, both.
Yeah, so it's very good at telling you, there are negative consequences. You have a hypothesis, putting the fork in the socket is good. And then you put the fork in the socket, scientific experiment, oops, turns out you electrocuted. That's what science is. And so it doesn't really give you need something else to answer the question of what do I do with this fork if I'm not going to put it in the socket. And for that, that's almost a religious question to some extent because it has some practical implications for your survival. I probably put it in my mouth, seek food, a bunch of other things. And often we get confused by the nature of science and how much reliance we put on it, when in fact it's very good at telling you negative things because that's when it's really accurate in denying hypothesis, right? As a one-on-one scientific method. Sorry, but you were onto something there as well. So I just wanted
No,
to add
no,
to your
go
point.
ahead. I Another thing that I guess the Wikipedia page at least talks about and it's worth mentioning is when it comes to technology, the more technology there is available, the more technology that is part of your life, the less free will you have. At least that's kind of like the thesis
And
statement.
who's saying this?
It is implied in it, it is said in the Wikipedia page. I'm not sure if it
Of
is
the book, you
of the
mean?
book.
Or let
I,
me
I don't
digest
know
that.
if it's true. The way I imagine that, or the way I rationalize that, is that if you are just a guy living in the Stone Age and have nothing available, or the technology is whatever you pick up in your hand, then you have a lot of free will to do whatever you want. But now you are a guy in the 21st century where you have um, a lot of technology available that is given to you and expected from you to use. Anything from filing your tax return online, using a car to travel around, social expectations around jobs and family, all limiting the framework you are working in, and it's all limiting for you as in your free will. To give you a, and this is just food for thoughts really, how what would we do if we wouldn't have any of the social expectations available and we wouldn't have any need to use any technology? We could if we want to, but what would we actually do? Where would humanity be if we would all be somewhat selfish and not caring too much for the communities, and we wouldn't want people to you know see us as great human beings? We would just all act like psychopaths. Would be a completely different world. Would we Could we argue that we would have more free will to do whatever we want, or we would just follow the same patterns all over again? I guess that opens up a completely new discussion because it's there's no
I'm
clear
trying to
answer there.
digest this one because I think we need to. It goes really philosophical really quickly, right? Free will.
Oh yeah,
I really I like free will. I think free will is important. But the way I interpret free will, it's kind of what makes us human, right? Why? I think this is kind of the theological question: why do we have good and evil in the world, right?
mhm.
Why does evil exist? And it's related to the fact that as humans, we need the evil to exist in order to exert free will, and that's what kind of the meaning of it's related to the meaning of life, that we have ethical choices, we have a path to follow, and we need to distinguish between good and evil, and that's what free will is to some extent, is choosing, making a choice over good and evil at every point in our lives. And there's a lot more to talk about that, but I was thinking, so I kind of
How do
disagree with
you
the.
think?
Hmm,
Just a quick question. Sorry to interrupt.
no,
How
it's
do you
okay.
think technology influences free will?
So I disagreed with that comment from Wikipedia there about technology limiting free will. So what I was saying earlier was technology is evolving so quickly that free will, which is effectively an expression of consciousness, right? Free will, like my daughter having, um, being aware of what she's doing and choosing not to put the knife in the socket or the fork in the socket. That is free will, deciding that that's bad
Mhm.
for a number of reasons, and it's a form of awareness. So let's put equality between free will and consciousness for a moment and tie it back to what I was saying earlier. But what I think technology does in our evolution, I start off with the hypothesis, or my axiom almost, is that um, we're all here solving for survival, right? So ultimately, we're involved in a kind of a Darwinistic game where life
Evolution.
wants to self-propagate. Yeah, so we're here kind of supporting life, whether you want to call it selfish gene theory or something else, or simply something religious. We're all
Mhm.
here to kind of pass it forward to some extent, and ride the evolution game and be better expressions of ourselves on an individual level, all the way to a species level. And technology is nothing more than a tool, I think. It's an expression of our right brain, of our left hemisphere, that deals with concrete things, and through our evolution, we become on the same platform, which is effectively our biological framework. We haven't evolved in the last million years. We're the same people we used to be. This is kind of from Sapiens, right? We're the same people that we used to be maybe a million years ago genetically. But on this framework, biological framework, we've managed to master up an extensions of ourselves, whether it's a fork, right, which is an extension of the hand, whether it's a computer, which is an extension of our cortex. Effectively, we're kind of androids to some extent, right? Cyborgs. And these are all effectively tools that we bring in for survival. But by extending ourselves, what happens if you're not aware of your hand, right, and you catch it in a drawer or somewhere, right? As you're closing the drawer, you're unaware of your tool, right? You're unaware of your appendix. You're unaware of your shape, right? Which is the concrete form of yourself. And I think we've been very good in the last since enlightenment to be extremely we're really prolific in extending our bodies, and then our consciousness effectively needs to catch up. So I don't see free will. I see free will as needing to expand because of the complexity that is created around us by this technological advance. So our effectively our consciousness and free will needs to expand. I don't see it as being limited by it. I think it needs to catch up.
So you think that technology improves our free will or improves the expression of our free will?
I just don't see it in that sort of relationship of one determining the other. I think they're just layers of ourselves, and I think when one progresses or regresses, the other one needs to adjust. It's effective. It's like almost the mind-body paradox. I think technology is effectively a form of our bodies. To some extent, we make things, we are things, right? We are flesh. We also I have a headphone on, right? I'm communicating with you. This microphone is the extension of my voice and the kind of the logos, right, that I'm projecting towards you, and the information I'm sharing. So no, I just really see them as layers, and I think what creates problems is not so much free will being limited, or I don't have an issue with freedom necessarily hindered by technology. I mean, look at the fact that we've got technology right now. We're both in lockdown. However, we're leading okay lives and we're able to communicate with the help of the computer and this platform, right? So
Hmm.
it's obviously enabling for our free will. And then our free will, we've made the choice to continue having a conversation with despite the fact that we can't see each other physically. So it is enhancing our free will, at least the options that we have. And then, but I don't see them in that relationship of one hindering the other. I think that,
Oh no.
and
Okay.
mm,
Yeah. No, that makes sense. But you do see some connection between the two. That's what I'm asking.
oh yeah, absolutely. I think, but that's what makes probably the book compelling is that at every stage of our life, we're always working in those two layers, right? It was almost the materialistic layer and the whatever you want to call it, the other one. And we're always faced with at least ethical
Spiritual layer.
choices. Yeah, and spiritual is all about choices, right? Ultimately, it's about what the technology tells you what you do know, but it doesn't tell you kind of what to do with it, and that's where you need an overlay, which is probably very important. Of what do you believe you should do with that fork, as I was saying earlier. That's what free will is, and consciousness, and you need that to apply it constantly over whatever shape your reality takes, if you want.
With the description of appendices getting stuck in shelves, you really missed out on a good dick joke. But besides the point, I think yeah, that makes all sense, and because the book itself doesn't present its ideas as this is what I'm saying.
Mhm.
It doesn't give you the interpretation in the end that was perfectly valid. In
That's what postmodernists do, right? Because they're I think especially in the '60s there was just people didn't like being told what to do as well, right? You can see it a lot in the but it's pre-hippie movement, right? Where which brings yoga and all that stuff to the West, right? Which as a return to the self, right? As a reaction to
Mhm.
this technological annihilation that was looming in the '60s, right? And materialism of it. No wonder that happened, right? And then but it was it was a partial reaction to the fall of Christianity effectively in the West, right? Because it was people didn't believe in the narrative, the Christian narrative anymore, and but they still needed something, and there was a return
Mhm.
to the self in a more Oriental way, let's say a different flavor. And
Yeah, I
what
guess
I was going to
people
say
are.
about postmodernism is that it doesn't, at the time, I hypothesized that it didn't dare tell you what to do. I think you see it in Camus as well and other existentialists at the border of postmodernism that they're disappointed, right, with what's happening. They're disappointed with reality. They don't have an answers, and they're just able to raise questions, right?
Mhm.
And they do it through a narrative form. You know,
Yeah, no, I agree. We can do Camus next time.
Yeah. Do you have you read it? I tried reading it a long time ago. I don't know if I'm competent enough to talk about it.
I
But
read The Stranger. My mother died yesterday, or maybe the day before. I don't remember.
that's right.
That that's a very Camus thing. It isn't a good book.
Yeah, I'm afraid of reading something that would depress me. I watched Bo Burnham's Inside show on Netflix the other day, and I really liked it, but there's some dark stuff in there, right? If you're stuck in lockdown for a whole year, you can immediately see that the conversation goes pretty quickly to racial issues, which has happened, right, with Black Lives Matter, and to thinking of the world in black and white. You think of the world in layers of power. There's the dialogue with the sock, which is effectively a Marxist dialogue, right, about oppression and power, and it's a very dark place to be in. And I was sort of like, yeah, I really like the songs, and maybe I like the ones towards the end of the show, which effectively provide a form of reconciliation with the self, where he's like, I don't know if you remember the last song. It's like All Eyes on Me. It's
I
a
do
kind of a
not.
return to the individual, right? He goes really wide in terms of societal commentary at the beginning, and he realizes that in order to solve problems, he needs to return back at the individual level,
Mhm.
with All Eyes on Me. I'm sorry for the philosophical commentary on Bo Burnham, but I struggled a lot because it was obviously everyone's frustrated about the lockdown, so it's very easy to think of things very quickly in terms of classes of people, and to start pointing out good and bad very quickly.
Yeah, I like Bo, but for the love of me, I couldn't watch it. I got very depressed by it.
Yeah, right. It's so cringy, and so you can tell there's genuine suffering there, and I want to avoid that sort of thing. Keep things light. Maybe this conversation was too serious, but I felt it was positive though this time. I didn't, I
To give you some levy in this, Casey watched the Bo Burnham show, and there was this song about some lady on Instagram. I don't remember because I
white woman's Instagram. Yeah, which
white
I
woman's
didn't like. I
Instagram.
don't like. I don't think it's okay to just be kind of positively racist, positive discrimination, and now it's okay to pick on white people just because.
I don't know the song itself, but Casey kept singing it, and she sang it so much that I was in the shower and I started singing it, and I was like, "God damn it! I can't believe that she planted it in my head." And
Oh yeah,
now I'm
that's
just
good.
like, "White woman Instagram." Anyway,
No, that's good. It's a good show. The problem is that all of the songs are they touch a chord, right? They all have some form of truth, but is it all of the truth or not? I think the last song is the only one that's really has everything in it. So, All Eyes on Me, highly
sure.
recommend.
All right. I think this wraps it up. I guess the moral of the story is don't give your 2-year-old a nuclear bomb because she might not know how to use it.
And don't put your dick in a drawer.
Absolutely not putting your drink in the
Use it.
drawer
Use it for good. Use it for.
unless you are into it.
Can I
That's
can I end
full.
with a quote from Jurassic Park?
Go ahead.
Life will find a way. Don't know if you remember this. What's the guy's name that's doing all the menu log ads?
yeah, I know who you mean. The
Yeah,
dude
that
who's
guy
waiting
sitting
in the corner.
chest bare chest.
Yeah, life will find a
Life will
way.
find a way.
Way. Yeah, what's the guy's name? Yeah, with glasses.
Goldblum, Gold.
Goldblum, Jeff Goldblum. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.